Well, it was fantastic to see you with the entire crew, obviously Molly notwithstanding, the other night, and hearing you guys speak. Having put so much time and effort into this on another continent and then having so much time away, what has it been like for you to see everyone again on this, award circuit?
It's been amazing. I mean, it was such a massive story to tell. And there were only four Americans that went to England to work on the film. And then everybody else was in Australia doing it. And it was just great reconnecting with everyone and reconnecting with everyone in a way where the film's been well received. And now we can talk about the massive undertaking that it took to make this movie. So it was really great to reconnect with everyone.
So Molly and Ron are building this thing and shooting this thing, and you and Benjamin, the composer, are together in London, uh, getting the dailies in, and you're cutting throughout the whole process.
Yeah, it was actually about a year ago around this time that Ron and Bill Connor, who's one of our executive producers and also his first AD, those guys took off. I think it was just after Christmas to go to Australia. And, we get asked a lot, why did we shoot in Australia? Well, they had a very strict lockdown, no COVID cases. It was a place where the location would lend itself to mimicking Thailand. We all came together and really organized ourselves on how we were going to manage all this footage and the logistics and the cave geography and location and time and who brought which boys out on which day. And so we set up basically for my cutting room what is a miniature sort of war room to help understand cave geography, distance, all those things like that. And then I started cutting right away. First day, I was sent a very small scene, which was basically the parents reuniting with their children at the hospital, which was cool because initially I always like to have what I call like a baby scene, just to make sure the equipment's working, checking the pipeline, that everything, the dailies were receiving everything, it looks good, the cut's working. And so from that point on, I can breathe a sigh of relief because I now know that only thing that we have to do is just continue doing what we're doing. Technically, we're good. That second day is when we started shooting in the tunnels. And boy, that was a lot of footage that started coming in. And that we started shooting then, Byron, before we even got Vigo and Colin in the water. And so it was a lot of stunt doubles that we were shooting with stunt kids and sometimes the real children. And that taught us a whole lot because it was discovered then and there that we couldn't really use the doubles very effectively for a majority of the film because they'd have to swim with their heads to the side or their head down. And then that was going to play against diver recognition and actually the underwater storytelling. So I quickly started sending Ron scenes so that he could see what the potential pitfalls of shooting with the doubles would be and how they could be an asset. But we really couldn't rely on that because diver recognition underwater, no dialogue to hang your hat on, only like scuba diving symbols and that kind of communication, nonverbal communication is what we would rely on. But the underwater specifics of the storytelling was so important. And once Vigo and Colin and those guys had gotten their training and scheduled and went underwater, the precision of that storytelling really took place. From the time I read the script on, I felt like with a story that most people were familiar with the outcome of it, how could we take them on a ride that would feel visceral, that would hit their central nervous systems, maybe hit their heart a couple of times, create a couple of laughs? But the idea was to tell this story as subjectively as possible. And it's otherworldly when you do that. So it meant having a lot of point of view shots. It also meant where the shots that I selected, the camera would be placed. And there are seven dives in the film, and each one has its own set of circumstances as the days go forward and the risk become even more dangerous. So I had to make sure that however I laid out those dives, there was not redundancy to them, that the audience could never sort of sit back and relax and realize, oh yeah, if we got the first boy out, then the second boy automatically will come out through the same sort of operation that we saw with the first boy. After that, the first group of kids were rescued. Then the danger and jeopardy became we may not need to show as much of the dive in or exiting, now we can show the complications associated with the dive. So it was really all about that experiential idea of how we could take the audience on a ride to show them how dangerous this mission really was, which then makes it even more miraculous that it even worked.
And the editing around the one diver that didn't make it out, the way you handle that, there's a humanity, there's a fear there, you see, and then there's sort of this peacefulness and sadness as the struggle to pull the apparatus back together, just he's got no oxygen left. Can you talk about that moment in the film, and that also of course ups the stakes going forward, that the best of the best are not impervious to the dangers of the cave?
Yeah, Saman's death was handled with a lot of discussion, a lot of care, a lot of recutting. That day, which was day 15 of the mission, there's so many things that are going on that raise the stakes. That is the day that Dr. Harry, the governor, the minister all agree to the plan. And so Saman, in his volunteerism, agrees that he's going to take those wetsuits in to the boys. And he goes in and he is with a dive partner and everything's going fine. And then his dive partner assumes he's okay and he gets tangled in the guideline. And as he gets tangled in the guideline, he actually starts exhausting his breathing. And then his regulator gets caught and a bunch of air, a lot of oxygen releases from that canister. And that particular scene, I cut that over the course of probably 2.5 weeks, not consecutively, but I would cut parts of it that I knew worked. I would go away to something else in the film that needed to be worked on. And then I would come back on it because I just needed perspective. There were times when I cut it too slow and it felt like very intentional or almost forecasting that he might die. And then there were times where we sped up the cut and then that felt in an odd way disrespectful to the sacrifice that he made. So it took a really long time to get the careful balance of all the things that we wanted that scene to speak to, which was respect for what he had did, with ultimate sacrifice. It's actually one of my favorite scenes in the film, as tragic as it is, because it's the ultimate sacrifice for the boys that he lost his life. And in that scene, I feel like departmentally speaking, it really illustrates how we all were in tandem working together on that scene because you see the difference in the breathing as he goes in calmly. Then when he really gets tangled in a line, how his breathing becomes heightened. Then score kind of kicks in to help accentuate that, the frenetic nature of him trying to untangle himself. And then finally, when he does, put his gear back on, whatever he sheds and gets it back on and continues forward, that to me is so noble because a lot of people would just decide, well, forget the wetsuits, just get yourself out of there. But there's a very specific shot where he looks back where he has come from and realizes he can't make it back. And then he looks forward and goes, maybe the best option is to go forward. And that's where you start seeing his labored breathing. And then in layers, the scene kind of gets deconstructed to the point where the last thing in the scene, he loses his breath. The last bubbles happen. It's really silent. And you just hear that last scrape of his tank scraping down against the stalactite. And, it kind of spoke to a little bit of one of my fears, which is not the claustrophobia of being in the cave, but maybe the fear of drowning. I'm not the biggest guy who's gung ho about going in the ocean or diving in certain situations and things like that. So I just kind of put myself in that situation, not knowing what that would feel like. And I just wanted to make sure that we handled it delicately so that he would be honored. It wouldn't just be we rushed through it just to show a death and then next scene. So I'm really proud of that scene because of the construction and deconstruction of it. And the fact that, this really happened. And at some point, his wife, children may see this, and this may be a living document to honor what he did.
Yeah, it's beautifully put and just so wonderfully handled in the film, narratively and with the respect to the tragedy of the real life scenario. I'm thinking also about the getting the kids out and the and doing the medication and showing the detail, like that's what I loved about what Ron did and what you did in the edit, is that he didn't rush through parts for any sort of narrative purpose or any, Amazon doesn't say, well, we need it to pop, pop, pop. And,
Mhm.
it was not a manipulated story. It was told with care. And I think that's what a great studio like Amazon and a great filmmaker and editor aim to do, is they want the audience to understand the process and not cheat it. And I really loved watching how you cut the kids being sedated and the actors, or the divers working with them to keep them kind of loose and then strapping them in. And then of course the difficulties or the uncertainty, because this is an untried procedure. Can you talk about that in the climax?
Yeah, that where there's a lot of discussion about that. On paper, it was a procedure to get the kids sedated, to strap them up. The plan was that Vigo would wait at a certain checkpoint, bring a kid there. They could tell him it's working. Rick Stanton, played by Vigo. They could tell him the process is working. Then they could start with boy number two and continue the mission on. And Ron and I talked about it when the footage came in. He usually gives me some notes on his plan. But as we've worked together over the past 5 years, my role and his trust in me has expanded greatly, to the point of now he's like, just show me how you see this scene. And I never saw that scene. Like, originally, he wanted to start with boy one, cross cut that to boy two, maybe come back to boy one, start boy three, and go back to boy one, and then boy four, and just kind of cross cut it all. When I put it together, Byron, the first boy and the procedure was so compelling, I had great difficulty cutting to the next boy, because it was, turns out to be the blueprint for how they were going to get the kids out. And I thought, Ron, we should just stay with this. So when he came into the edit, I explained to him, gave him a little context. You're not going to see it exactly as the plan that you've discussed, but I want you to see this. And I have your cut set aside just in case we need a version that is combining the two ideas, or one that you just feel doesn't work, and we'll go with your idea and I'll show that. And when he sat down and he saw it, he was like, oh my gosh, I see why you did what you did here, because it is so compelling. It takes us all the way from the first kids being brought up and the little boy's mask not fitting. So we see that there are difficulties and challenges, and it's not a perfect mission. If you apply that methodology to the idea of this is how we're going to bring the boys out, it all kind of works. And then that way, I don't have to show the entire process again. Now I can show the complications associated with bringing each boy out thereafter. So that's kind of how that evolved. So that was one of my favorite scenes, where there's very little dialogue there, but it's just, James, go to work, do your thing, and Ron happened to like it, and so it worked very well for helping the audience understand that this was the missing piece that you guys never knew about. There's each one of those divers kind of has a moment where it shows that they're vulnerable. They're human beings. These are not, we weren't trying to make them these godlike figures who just expertly went into the caves and there was never any risk involved with them. There was emotion, there was attachment to the children. And I think that those breakdowns, they just add to the drama and the complication and all the risk associated and all the details that were part of this story. Once you get into the characterization of everything that happens, it just heightens the drama and really shows you how risky it was for not only the boys that were being brought out, but for the individual divers, and the emotional toll, as well as the physical toll that it took on that dive team and the Thai Navy SEALs to get the kids out.
And the conversation of, we don't expect them all to come out, even though you kind of know the outcome, the way the story is presented and you're in the reality of their moment and you're not thinking ahead, it hits you as dramatic and you do feel that. And that's just expert craftsmanship on your part with Ron. If there was one particular story you have in terms of a conversation with Ron you'd like to delve into, I'd love to close with that.
Hold on a second. because I I kind of get emotional talking about it. So, in working with Ron for all the time that I have, which is now like 5 years, so the film was very long, because it had so many details and so many scenes in it that we were trying to make sure that we were thorough in telling every aspect of the story. As we started cutting it down, there were quite a few scenes that had to come out, obviously, to get it down from what was a 5 hour cut to basically a viewable cut at about 240 or so. And, it turns out that a lot of the scenes that we were taking out had our principals in them. And at one point, we were working together one day, and a lot of the scenes had to come out with Colin Farrell. And Ron goes, "Oh my God, I don't know how I'm gonna tell Colin like all these scenes have to be cut out because there was really nothing wrong with them. It was just about keeping the urgency up in the timeline and driving the story forward." And so there were lots of scenes where everybody had to, scenes lost or whatever, deleted scenes. So he goes, "Man, I feel like I'm selling Colin down the river." And he looks at me and goes, "Oh my God, I'm telling an African American, um, I'm saying selling someone down the river," which goes back to that whole history of slavery and slaves being sent down the river to the next spot for sale or whatever. And he looked at me and he apologized, and I know his heart, and I was like, "What's going on?" And then he goes, "I'm so sorry, James. I'm so sorry, And I'll tell you what. Here's what he do. You can call me Opie at any point ever." And I said, "Okay, is that just for today? Does it have an expiration on it? Can I do it privately, publicly?" Like he goes, and then that'll square us away. And so that shows you the kind of guy that he is, the how personable and how caring he is. And that's why the film is what it is.
I so love this film, and I love your work on it. You're such a presence, your talent, and then your person just amplifies that. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful collaboration, and I hope to see you guys continue to do many more projects. So, James, I just want to say thank you for your time. You're a
Byron, thank you.
treat, and I wish you the best of luck with this, with your guild, and also at the Oscars.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. And I'd love to talk to you. I feel like this is just the beginning of us getting to know each other and maybe doing this again.
I'm definitely down. Every time you put something up, we're gonna do it.